Hey, how's your week been?
My week has been very good. I've been very intrigued in since our talk last week and the Joshua Live last week on this whole concept of true surrender and what can be accomplished. So I really try to spend the week accepting in acceptance and understanding without attachment to the outcome. And I've enjoyed it. So I've been testing a lot of different sort of ideas and feelings and meditations, and very much enjoying it. Letting go as much as possible. I think that's always been something that I've strived to understand a little better.
So we'll definitely do a dive into that. But before we talk about surrender and acceptance and letting go, or the meaning of life, or the origin of the universe, or anything else of profound importance, or deliberate creation, and so on, what I want to do is just mention your Italian recipe on TikTok. So I really enjoyed that. It was amazing. So for everybody, Jerry's TikTok handle is at Jerry Kidd. So it's JERRYKIDD at the end. So Jerry Kidd with two D's at the end and Jerry with a J. And you will find his amazing Italian meatball segments there. And I'm just waiting for you to record the sauce. Like, we need the sauce, man.
Yeah, I did. So I actually posted that last night or the other night. I
Oh, cool.
posted a crock pot, a Rayo's crock pot, quick Rayo's crock pot sauce. And it's funny. So the handle at Jerry Kidd is really indicative of what my goal is on through, and I'm going to start doing some different stuff on TikTok, is just to be a kid again, to feel like I did when I was a kid.
It's very interesting you should say that, because we were just Zooming with Krista, who has freedom courses, and her first course that she's making is about people with drinking issues, and it's about drinking without fear. So I think she's called it Drinking with Freedom. And so it's based on her own personal experience from a woman who started drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana at age 12, right? And she's had many challenges, and she's overcome them all, including depression and insomnia, developing her own ways of overcoming them. And she's now wanting to share these with the world. But the reason I wanted to mention about the kid is that her daughter, who seems to be an amazing young woman, is turning 13. And she's basically, and the kids, as 13-year-olds are, she's very grown up in many ways and got a lot of her own ideas and stuff, which is very cool. But she's also saying to her kid, hey, listen, don't try and grow up too fast on everything, right? If you want to play and have fun and still, explore the kid in you, do that. And so don't care what anyone else thinks. Like, don't feel you just have to be the teenager or the adult immediately. Like, if you're still feeling the urge to be a kid in these ways, do it. Don't do what I did. Like, don't do everything as an adult and shut off your inner child or your fun-loving child self at too young an age. And that's another reason why, like the sheer fun and joy of your TikTok recipes. Even if I didn't want to cook the recipe, which I do, it's just entertaining anyway. And also you channel your origins, as an American Italian from New York, and that all comes through as well. And it's good. I mean, it's a part of who you are. It's a persona of yours. It's a genuine persona, and I really enjoyed it. So anyway, back to surrender, because to me, when you say surrender, it's like, oh, that sounds scary. Like, what do you mean by surrender? Like that. So surrender seems like giving up or something, or it sounds like something out of our, Catholic past, or, Christianity, like surrender to the Lord. And none of that on the surface resonates with me. It sounds scary. So can you enlighten us about what you mean? I want to hear something about surrender, which says to me, this is a process that is actually beneficial and not in the least scary, and I'm not giving up anything.
Yeah.
Maybe I am.
So the interesting part is, so I have actually had the same feeling you had, right? So I do sort of what I do is I start looking at books and I start trying to understand. I read, I look for podcasts, I look for information to try to understand. And everybody explains it differently, right? Michael Singer's got a book called Surrender, which was one of my favorite books with the idea to surrender, but he never explained what it meant to surrender, right? And what that term, how to actually accomplish that term. And I do think that Joshua is the first person, it's the first experience I've had where they actually explain what surrender means. So the way I've interpreted it, and I think the same way you have, I've had so much resistance to it because we're taught in our society, even though you're 10,000 miles away from me in New Zealand and I'm here in Arizona, surrender still means the same thing: giving up, throwing the right flag, saying I can't do it anymore. That's not what it means and that's not what it meant in the beginning of time. What it meant was to accept. So surrender for us is to just stop the resistance, right? Stop fighting what is. Stop trying to control. So for me, and what I got from Joshua, which is, and I'll be forever be grateful to Gary for channeling this, is that surrender is to give up control, to accept everything as perfect, to lean into the perfectness and the beauty of what it is, and see it that way. Don't see it as in what's wrong, what could be changed, what could be fixed, what needs to be fixed, because there are, I think Google, I did this research. Google has 130 million books with different information out there. If you read 1,000 books, that's 50 books a year for 10 years or whatever it is, 20 years. If you read 50 books a year, I'd not Bill Gates or whatever it is, Warren Buffett, right? The most anybody reads is one book a week, right? And that is 0.00007% of the information in the world. Wow. So if you and I think that we are, and you're an avid, obviously, researcher and reader like I am, right? We love information. We have such a small fraction of what's available to us. And surrender means accepting the universe has more information and is trying to give it to us. So surrender is actually being open to receiving what the universe is giving.
Okay, we'll come back to the giving up control part in a minute. So the way I hear that about receiving what the universe is able to give us is it's about receiving the stuff to which you are a vibrational match. So it's the stuff which is in sync with your vibration being the collection of your beliefs, attitudes, thoughts, memories, emotions, all that kind of stuff, everything that goes on in you all the time. Your constant message within yourself is your vibration. And your vibration basically determines what you're experiencing in your life right now. And also, the only information that you can really ever absorb or are interested in is the information to which you are a vibrational match. Because, like when we were doing boot camp, the Joshua's Unlimited Abundance boot camp, which I did that like 13 times. And even in like the 12th and 13th time, it was, was that actually in here before? Was that text in there before? It was like, I thought I was seeing it for the first time ever, but clearly I wasn't. And I just was not a vibrational match to that message and I wasn't ready for it. So yeah, there is all that information there. And it's, if you have resistance about things, very simple example. I was talking to a friend and they're thinking of moving out of the city. And I said, what about this part of New Zealand? Too far away. What about this part of New Zealand? Too crowded. And I said, well, hold on a minute. You actually don't know any of that. You haven't been to those places really and had a look around. We have been looking around. And once I got rid of my preconceptions about which places were whatever, I said, we saw all these amazing properties for sale that were never, these houses and, land for sale that were never dreamed existed. So like, you're just basically cutting off everything because of resistance, right? Or fear or whatever it might be. Whereas you could say, oh, I never thought of that place. Let me think about that. Let's go and have a look. So that's a very simple example of resistance. And Joshua does talk about that, the idea that when somebody says something to you, like, let's go to the movies or let's go to the shop or, let's go out, for a drink or a meal or whatever, oftentimes like people say no, which is what this person does quite often. And I've noticed that, 10 minutes later, they're like, Oh, but that's actually not a bad idea. So Joshua is saying, well, some people never get to that, right? That person does, but most people don't. They say no because it's easier than saying yes, because yes brings up a fear. Like we could go to dinner, but what's my bank balance like? I got some work to do. The food might be bad for me. I might have to wait. There may be no tables. I might be able to get in the restaurant I want to. There might be traffic on the way. If I drive, I can't have a drink. And so you list like 10 reasons why, and it's like, no, no, no. Can we do that tomorrow night? Meaning, no, I'm never going to do that. So whereas Joshua says, when somebody says that thing, say yes. Like that should be your starting proposition. And then, of course, you might say, if it was an event a week later, you realize you actually can't go, you can always say no later, but start with a yes instead of a no. So that's a kind of a trivial or simple example of resistance. So you're saying give up your resistance and open yourself to the information available in the universe, because stuff comes to you all the time, but you just don't realize, right?
No, and I think I think you said that beautifully, and I absolutely agree. It is. So when you're not surrendering, you're in resistance, right? As a base point, as a beginning, right? So if you're in resistance, you're not open to receiving, right? You're stopping. So I know you're trying to control, right? So control is resistance, right? So that's, you're not allowing the universe, you're not accepting the universe, right? In everything that is as perfect. I spent my life in control, trying to control every aspect of everything. For that, I did not receive. The universe was always offering. I just wasn't open to receiving. So the minute you take a step back, you stop the control, you surrender, you give up resistance, it opens up. So even if you are, to your point, if you're going out to dinner, that sounds like a better idea, when before it wasn't a good idea. Well, what's changed? Nothing's changed. The only thing that's changed is you no longer try to control the situation. You're open to it. My wife and I did this last night. We went to go watch one of my daughter's friends' high school basketball games. And then I said to her, let's go get something to eat. She's like, well, yeah. I said, honey, let's go get something to eat. Let's just go out and do something. And we did. But the initial response was, it's late. I got some work to do. I got an early meet. I'm like, stop, forget all of it. Like, let's just go out and have fun. Like we'll do it an hour. And it ended up being a couple of hours and we had fun. But we all stop and say no. And that irrational fear, right? All those excuses pop up in your head. That's resistance. That's control, right? Because the universe gave you that idea to go out to dinner. And that's a great example you used, right? So that idea popped in your head. Where did it come from? People said, oh, it came from, like, yeah, it popped in your head. It came from the universe. Like, where else do you think it came from?
Yeah.
Like, you have a wallet full of stuff that I don't know. Every time you open it, something, I don't understand. Where do people think it came from? And think about this, to even further that point, Rob, like we're having a conversation. I don't have a script. You don't have a script. You don't know you don't know how you're going to finish a sentence. I don't know how I'm going to finish the sentence that I just started 6 words ago, right? The universe is filling my head with information based upon, as you pointed out before, my vibrational match. If my vibrational match is control, is resistance, I am going to be very narrowed and very limited in what I am going to say, can say, and how long that conversation is going to go on. If I just open it up and say, hey, whatever happens, happens, and wherever the conversation goes, it goes, and let it flow, it's going to happen more organically and more naturally with, I think, more interesting information.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think when we first started this, I used to think, what are we going to talk about? Oh my God, are we going to have enough to talk about? And, am I going to make sense? And now I don't think about that at all. If something really big's been happening in the week, we might say, should we talk about this? And sometimes we do, and mostly we don't. And I also keep sort of trying to get back to the idea of, well, can we try and stick to one topic? Because when I go to write the description of the video, I have to listen to the whole video and then put all the description of everything we talked about. And I like to do the chapters or the timestamps. And that means you got to listen to the entire thing through. And it's like, man, there's a different subject every 2 or 3 minutes. Could we actually stay on one topic for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes? Like writing the chapters, this was meant to be this many. And it's like, anyway, but you're talking about control. And I had the image of a bulldozer. Might be it, like control is the bulldozer approach. You are going to get there, but you destroy everything along the way, right? Does that kind of resonate as an analogy? Because I got another one.
I love it.
Yeah.
I do. I love that analogy, pushing everything out of the way to get to your
Yeah.
destination.
And you'll
Right?
probably get there, but
Yeah.
and what about the energy and the magnitude of the machine to get there? And
Well,
it's like,
did you hear? And to your point, that's a great analogy. And I think Gary in the Joshua Live had a similar analogy where he said you're running a marathon, but you're running it through a street filled with people, and all the energy it takes to talk to that person, to get that person to just get past to get to the end. You've or he said he said you're running like 100 yards. But you got to run through when you're in resistance. All these people are in your way, and you got to get out of the way. You got to move. It's not a direct path.
oh, I
It's all
see.
over.
Right,
And
right.
the energy that the actual energy to run the 100 yards was a fraction of the energy it required to complete the race because of all of the resistance you created. Which to me was like I visually, and just like your bulldozer analogy, I'm like, and that is the difference between surrender and acceptance, because surrender isn't just surrender, it's surrender in
We'll come
acceptance.
back to surrender because I'm not feeling we're totally done on that. But I wanted to use another analogy, which would be an example of the opposite of the bulldozer approach, right? Which is allowing. And the image that came to mind was a flower, because a flower is there to get pollinated, right? So the flower pops up and says, I got these amazing colors, I got this incredible fragrance, I got this incredible design. I'm going to make myself irresistible to the creatures to whom I want to be a vibrational match, such as a bee. And so the bees and the butterflies, for that matter, come along, they see that flower, they smell the scent, and they're all attracted to it. The flower just sits there confidently basking in the sun, knowing that everything it needs will come to it that day.
I love it. And to your point, it's that simple. Although it sounds complex, right?
Yeah.
But when you describe it like that, a bulldozer versus a flower, it is that simple. Now, how
So
do
the flower is
you?
in surrender, right? Whereas the bulldozer is the old way of doing things. But so the idea of surrender is, what are you surrendering to? And what are you're giving up resistance, and you're giving up the idea that you need to control everything. Is that what you're saying?
You're giving up an expectation to the outcome. You're giving up in terms of surrender and acceptance, you are no longer trying to control the outcome, right? So all of us are focused on everything we do is to achieve something. And if we don't achieve that specific goal, or we achieve it in a different way, we are either disappointed, we're classified as a failure, didn't work, whatever it may be, right? We're invested in that outcome. That is control, that is resistance.
So
The
was
idea,
it scary or difficult for you to move from that old way to this new way, from the bulldozer to the flower?
I don't know if I've fully done it. It's like I'm trying,
Well,
it's,
and why is
it's a
that?
funny thing.
Because what's holding you back?
Well, because, so here's the thing, right? So here's a great analogy, a life analogy. So my niece, who's living in Florida, and she's 21, living with her boyfriend, there was an incident, and it got to the point where it was more than just a fight, right? There might have been some a physical confrontation. There might have been a significant emotional um, back and forth, right? So everybody was like, "Hey, what are we going to do?" So now here, old Jerry, I'm on a plane in 5 minutes. Like, it's not even a question. I'm flying down there. This is unacceptable on every level, right? I'm going to go into that situation, exert myself as this loudmouth Italian, and control the situation everywhere possible, and do what I think is best. That is the old Jerry, the old way, right? The new way is, wow, I'm really sorry. I'm here for you. I'm sending you love. Let me know what I can do to be of help. And how can I help you, feel better? Tell me what I can do. Sat back. Everybody else was involved. Lots of emotions flying back and forth. And I just kept saying, I love you. I want to be here for you. Tell me what I can do to help you. And I let the situation occur. people are like, you need to call, I'm like, I texted her, I'm here if you need me. That's it. And let the situation unfold. She was going to reach out and have conversations with her parents, right? With I'm her uncle, right? And her aunt and uncle and her friends and her grandfather, right? So there's all these people involved. And what I would have done and versus what I did now was, hey, tell me how I can help and what can I do for you? And just let it be versus not, just literally pushing getting the bulldozer in, plowing from Arizona to Florida and, right into the front door, getting out and dragging people by their hair into the situation to say, stop. So that is, for me, that was a huge, and to be honest, it was peaceful. Knowing that somebody might be in a situation where they might be hurt is a very difficult situation to be in, because you don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you don't want to not be there. If someone asks for help, you don't say, I'm not at the point where I say no. That's the universe, I believe, reaching out and saying, hey, this person needs some help. How can you go and be helpful in a loving, kind, beautiful way, right? Whatever that takes, right? And if she needed me to get a plane ticket, hey, it's emailed to you, get on the plane in 5 minutes. It's ready for you, right? If that's what was being asked of me, I would be happy to, versus me taking the initiative and trying to do it all, push it all, make demands, say, if you don't do this, then you can't have that, right? If this, then all of those things, which is what we do in life. We put demands on people. Let all of that go and see what comes to you. So for me, that was and like during the whole time, like I said, at a moment's notice, if somebody would have asked me to do something, I would have been part of the solution with them and saying, okay, this is what the universe is at, versus me making or taking control and making all of the arrangements. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that's quite a difficult one for the reason you said, because the whole circumstance is difficult, and our way is intervention, and there are personal safety issues in there as well. So
you talk about money,
complex.
Right? So it's personal safety and money that we are all in control of, right? Personal safety and finances.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing, right? And you and I have such a connection when it comes to financial prosperity. This week, there was a lot of stuff going on financially in the markets and all this kind of stuff. And in the past, I would have reacted. And I'm like, I'm not inspired to do anything. No, let's let it go. Like, I literally had no energy to do anything, to make any changes, to do any shifting, and I just said, it is what it is. Am I going to follow up? Am I going to, continue to look at information? Yeah, because it's, to me, I'm open to receiving it. If I'm receiving it in a text, in an email, on Twitter or Instagram or on social media, if for some reason I'm spending 5 minutes and I'm seeing that information, well, then I'm supposed to be seeing it. Right? I'm like, okay. I've had, people say, oh, this, and I'm like, okay. Now, don't react, right? Just take a moment and say, okay, what am I inspired to do? If I'm not inspired to do anything, then I'm not going to do it. Like, that's a big, and what do you mean by inspired? Reacting in fear, inspired in love, inspired in prosperity, inspired in joy. I wasn't inspired in love or joy to do anything. I was like, and everything I felt like doing, I felt like I was doing in fear. So I didn't do it.
Yeah. And behind all those things, like, we do have compassion and empathy for another person, but fundamentally, I think mostly we want to avoid feeling bad. So if a situation occurred and made us feel bad, then our instinct is to jump in and stop that thing that made me feel bad.
100%. And like I said, it's still a struggle. It's not like it's a guarantee. I talk about there's still a distance where it's a niece versus my own daughter.
Yeah.
Right. And that distance gives me pause, right? Where
that's true. And there are other parties involved in, her own parents. And also, without going into the details of what happened and how it ended up, but jumping on the plane and being the bulldozer may not have actually produced a better outcome in general. And also you've got to decide what is a good outcome. And then also, would it have been a better outcome for her? Maybe, maybe not.
Well, you said something interesting. So this is one of the things that I'm debating, and I shouldn't say debating, thinking over and over. Would it have been, you said, would it have been a better outcome? Right. And that's the whole concept, is to let go of whatever, to let go of any attachment to whatever the outcome may be. Like, I don't like,
right.
if
well,
like, it is like not setting an expectation for the outcome.
Yeah.
Like, that's really tough.
Well, it is really tough. And a starting point, which is also not always easy, is the opening of the first Joshua book, which I think is a perception of reality, Gary's book, Gary Temple Bodley. And I think it starts off with something like, everything is perfect. There is no wrong anywhere in the universe. I mean, I've got the book on my Kindle. I could have a look, but I think that's how it starts. And that is the opening proposition. And right then and there, most people have a great deal of difficulty accepting that. And we've talked about that extensively over the last few dozen videos. But it is, if you can get your head around that concept, and people start to say, well, what about this terrible thing that happened, or that terrible thing that happened? And initially you and I used to say, well, start off with the baby steps. Like, don't think about, some terrible world event. Think about something small, such as like the traffic light turned red when you thought you were in a hurry. Like, can you actually turn that around and reframe it and do a 180 on that? But then Joshua made a very good point, because one day somebody said, the world's in a mess, and this is happening in this country, and this is happening in that country. And Joshua said, is that happening to you? And she said, no. Okay, well, there you are. So they didn't say the next thing, which to me was like, well, you're just upsetting yourself with a thought, because that thing that you saw on television that says this is happening in this country, isn't that terrible? Like, that is a thought. I'm not wishing to be non-compassionate and to indicate that I'm not caring about world events or anything else, but if it's not happening to you, it's not part of your reality. It's purely a thought that arrived into you. And obviously we can't deal with everything in the world that might upset us. So the very good starting point is, what about what's happening in my reality? Can you accept that things that might have seemed difficult or bad might actually have had some good to them? And ultimately, if they didn't happen, you wouldn't be where you are now. And could you see that that thing that you thought was terrible at the time turned out to be good? And often the analogy is used of your very first ever romantic relationship, when you're a teenager or whatever age you were, and then it broke up and you might have been devastated. But you look back now and think, wow, if I hadn't been with that person, then I never would have learned all this other stuff and changed and grown and developed. And you may still know that person and see they're living a life over there. And it's like, man, we have nothing in common now. And, so on and so forth. So you don't want to be still in that. Well, maybe some people are, but most aren't. And you don't want to be still in that, first, teenage fling or love affair or whatever it might have been, whatever you want to call it, infatuation. You don't want to be still in those ones. I mean, it was amazing at the time, but it's not who you want to be living with now. And so
it's funny you say that.
So then you say you had the pain of the breakup. Sorry, I didn't get to my point. Hold on a second.
Oh, no, sorry.
The breakup was incredibly painful. You might have cried and, woe is me, and I feel terrible, and that was horrible. I'm never going to do that again. I'll never want to fall in love again, as they say. So I'll never fall in love again is a song, isn't there? Bobby Gentry. What do you get when you fall in love? And so anyway, the point is that you can easily look back now and say, yeah, well, that was very painful at the time. And so was, I'd been divorced and widowed, but you look back and, the first marriage, and it's like, yeah, okay, I can see why I was in there, and I see why I got out of it. And we've gone in our different directions, and it was very painful, but I'm really glad I'm not in that marriage anymore.
Yeah, it's funny you just brought up an analogy. So my daughter, my youngest daughter, is 16, has been dating this guy for a year. Very, very nice, kid. They're high school kids. They're their first, and he is going to be going to play baseball in college, and he's leaving next year to go. Yeah, it might actually be drafted. He's a pretty talented athlete, and like my wife and I are talking, and we're like, wow, this is her first love. I mean, it's going to end, right? Or at least I'm like, we don't have any attachment to whatever happens. But I'm paying such close attention to how she's feeling and what the emotions are, because looking at it from the perspective you just described, right, versus when we were in it, it's such a
Yes.
different experience.
Yes. Yeah. Well, one of our lawyers, I said, "How's your week been?" Like, I haven't spoken to him for a while. We know him quite well, and he said, "Oh, my daughter who's at university, she just broke up with a boyfriend. She was first year uni, so she might have been 18, because he cheated on her." And so, we've been dealing with that. And I said, "Oh, that's very tough." I said, "Of course, you and I know, although you may not want to point it out to her, that better to go through this now than to stay with him for 5 years, get married and all the rest of it, and then find out he was a cheater and blah, 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 blah." And he said, "Actually, I did point that out to her."
That's very funny. There's such a funny situation, right, when it comes to that relationships and why, once again, the criteria we create around what will make my relationship successful and what's going to end my relationship. So before we even get involved, we set expectations. We control. So if that person does X, Y, or Z, and let's just say cheating for whatever, I'm never talking to that. We're done. Everything's completely off. So here's a situation where people have gotten together for 20 years, for 10 years, for 5 years, every single day of their life. And for some reason, one of the two partners strays for that moment, and everything is thrown off the table and forgotten because we set these expectations. I'm not saying we don't do that, and we shouldn't do that, but I'm saying for us to take a step back and just be aware of how harsh we are to each other when it comes to judgment and setting expectations. It's very difficult, right, to be successful in a relationship. If you look at it in America today, more people get divorced than stay married, right? Why? Because people have these expectations, and they're invested in the outcome. The minute that outcome is not what they had thought it was going to be, they pull back all of their emotions, all of their feelings. They take their ball and they go home. They're gone, right? I've said to, both of my daughters, I've said to times, I said, your only goal in a relationship with anybody is to share and experience love in any way that you're going to be doing that. And if you go in that way versus looking to take it, receive it, and own it, and instead go out, share it, express it, and experience it together, right? Just surrender to that opportunity. Instead of trying to control it, suck it all in, own it all, demand it, control it. Make sure you had guardrails. The minute that person steps off, they didn't call. They were 5 minutes late. They did this. They did that. They went out with their. I'm like, we try to control so much of our lives, right? And then we have so much invested in the outcome of each controlled moment. It's impossible for us to be happy.
Yeah,
impossible.
And not only in this instance you talked about, not only control so much of our lives. In that case, the one person's trying to control the other person, their romantic partner. With the idea of romantic love that we have in our modern world and soulmates and the one and all the rest of that. Of course, I believe that we're eternally connected to all the important people in our lives, probably everybody in our lives in a soul sense. But the idea of a soulmate or the one is just a romantic concept that somebody dreamed up that got some sort of currency, but it's a load of baloney, really. But anyway, the whole idea of romantic love, that marriage should be based on romantic love, is a fairly recent cultural construct. In most of the world and for most of history of time, marriage was a matter of convenience and group allegiances and all the rest of it, so people got married because, people in the West are shocked that in India, even with our highly educated friends, arranged marriage is still the norm, right? So most people in India, I do believe, including highly educated people that we know, dentists and doctors and people, they have arranged marriages. And I mean, it's so normal there that like the gym trainer and the guy who was our driver one day, it's like they say, "Sir, was your marriage a love marriage or an arranged marriage?" Like not realizing that they assume it's a universal thing, which is interesting to me. And arranged marriages seem to work at least as well as love marriages. Some do, maybe better, I don't know, who knows, whatever. But anyway, my point is that marriage was never about romantic love until quite recently, right? And so it's a relatively recent cultural construct. And the second thing is that till death do us part used to be a short time, whereas now it's a long time. because it wasn't that many hundreds of years ago that we died in our mid-30s, right? And it was very rare to live beyond your mid-30s. So if you got married at 20 or 18 and you went to 30 or 35 and you were gone, that's a lot different to living to 90 or 100 like we do now. So
Wow.
that was the second thing. And the third thing I want to say about marriage, so romantic love is a new thing, age span has increased, lifespan, is that I realized when it came to my father, and I'll come back to romance in a minute, I realized recently that I had a list of what a father should be. And I thought, where did I get that list from? And why am I judging him against this list? And then I realized it was just a thing I made up, and I threw the list away. And instead I looked at what he did bring to my life instead of some imaginary list. So my point is what you said to your daughters, which is, well, chuck away the list, because that list is baloney. You don't have a list going in there. It's whatever you said. It's about, loving and sharing and growing together, whatever that thing is. And the last thing I want to tell you is an anecdote about a client we used to have before we went and did our digital nomad lifestyle for 5 years. And this woman, she sold it now, but she had a luxury lodge, a beautiful, beautiful place that was like stunning, cliff top and infinity pool and really original architecture and just secluded. In New Zealand, luxury lodge, thousands of dollars a night. And most of the famous people who went there, they would never be able to say, but some famous musicians, world famous musicians and so on, actors did go there. It was that kind of place, right? Anyway, so we're talking about marketing strategies one day, and they've had a lot of weddings there because you can hire the whole place for a wedding if you've got, plenty of tens of thousands and many tens. And I said, why don't you contact the people that some of the really wealthy people who got married here, like, from Asia or America or Britain or wherever, Europe, and say, why don't you come and have your 1st or 5th anniversary with us? And she said, oh, I did, but I stopped. And she said, I noticed that the more they spent on the wedding, the shorter the duration of their marriage.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness.
That's
oh
true.
My goodness.
That is true. So that's what she said. And I thought, wow, that says it all, because I was selling a ring through a jeweler, and a woman bought the ring, but then pandemic came and they were going to go from New Zealand to get married in Mexico. And so the jeweler said, well, that sale is off because we always have 30-day, whatever cool down period. And the pandemic came and they can't go to Mexico to get married. So the pandemic's 2 years ago started, and they still haven't got married. And I could be wrong, but my take on that was, the destination and the experience of the wedding is far more important to you than the idea of getting married, right? So they could have got married at home in 101 amazing places, but if their idea was so stuck on it had to be this thing. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like the lodge version of a marriage. Like, no, I have my list and we must get married like this, and it's going to be in Mexico, and if I have to wait, anyway. So that was my story about.
And that's such a perfect tie into control and surrender, right? And resistance, because the pandemic hit. And if you looked at it, to be honest, and I feel for anybody that had tragedy, and my heart goes out to them, right? There is empathy, but COVID was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I don't mean that to disrespect anybody that had anything. I work from home. I see my wife all the time. I got a better job. I see my kids. I have so much more freedom. I enjoy what I'm doing now. I'm like, this is the greatest opportunity I've ever had.
Yeah, it's kind of like a corporate straitjacket buster.
And I just, and right when COVID hit, I changed jobs, but I just started with Gary when that happened, right? So it wasn't like I purposefully was surrendering. I was accepting what was happening and not fighting it, right? So there's a difference between accepting, not fighting, and surrendering completely, right? There's a difference. So what people also do is they want to control behavior, right? So part of what resistance is trying to control someone else's behavior, trying to control what someone else is going to do, how someone else is going to react, manipulate the situation, right? And not trying to do harm, right? But just manipulate the situation. All of that is resistance. All of those things, you got to let all of those things go. And if somebody wants to fire you, you got to go give them a hug and a kiss and say, thank you, right? That is acceptance. That is surrender. In the book, Michael Singer, he had a guy, one of his sales guys, was embezzling and doing some, some financial espionage. So he was being investigated by the federal government and all these different people because there was a health insurance aspect to it. And his lawyer said, there's no way they're dropping charges against you. He's like, he was a CEO and the owner of the company. And he's like, I didn't do anything. He's like, you're innocent. There's no question. There's nothing. It was all done by this sales guy. And he's like, okay, whatever happens, happens. And then he's like, and they were like, are you going to fight? Are you going to, he's like, no, I got lawyers. I'm going to follow what I need to get done. Right. I'm not going to be overly X, Y, or Z. I'm just going to do what I need to do. And I'm just going to, whatever they want to do to me, go ahead. Like, I have a defense. I'm telling you, I didn't do it. I'm sharing all the truth with you. It's up to you. And they dropped all the charges against the guy. He's fully surrendered. He fully surrendered in that moment. He did what he was inspired to do, show my innocence, right? And didn't go to battle with a bulldozer, which is a great analogy. And his lawyer's like, there's no way they're dropping charges. The next week they drop charge. Lawyers say, I've never had this happen in my entire life.
That's amazing.
And he writes the book on it. And he created the company. He said he creates the company through surrender. He didn't want to do the company. And someone said, do this. He's like, okay. It's kind of like the Jim Carrey movie. He just said yes to everything. Right. And all of a sudden these things happen. He created a multi-billion-dollar company through surrender. He wanted to go do all these different things. And every time an opportunity came, he was like, it's the universe. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Hey, I went through a litigious phase. And when I was in business and coming, sold out of the business. And I guess I got to that point where I was an owner of the business and a director and a boss, and I had money. And so I got into the power and control thing. And then various things happen. And then I realized, you can lawyer up and pay some money and it makes your problems go away and you win and it feels good. And then over a period of time, I just kind of dug myself into a darker and darker hole, really, by taking that bulldozer approach and litigation. And then it was like, well, that actually isn't working out at all in any way whatsoever. And since I changed my thinking on that, I went from having all sorts of stuff going on to nothing like that has ever happened for many, many years. And I realized what a hell on earth I'd created out of my own thinking, really, with my own faulty, misinformed, inaccurate ideas of things. Very interesting, really. And I see people lawyering up, and I think to myself, do you really want to go down that path? Like, because even if you win, you don't really win, because the angst and the cost and the time and energy. Anyway, enough of that. So did we deal with acceptance and surrender? So surrender basically is accepting. I mean, some of the steps that can be difficult for people to grasp is to accept that everything is perfect. And if you can't accept it in the world at large, at least look at your own life and understand those things. A big step for me was to understand that the things in my life that I didn't like, I had created. And then it was a harder step to actually accept that the things that were good in my life, I also created. It was easier, I think, to blame myself, so to speak. But anyway, I eventually got to realize that I was creating everything. And then it's like, if you created it, you did it for a reason, it must be perfect. So that's kind of a nice little circular piece of logic that ties that up nicely. And then it's acceptance of everything that comes along. And if you are a deliberate creator of your reality, which is a whole new big concept, then if you look at a simple example of that on a recent Joshua Live, Jojo asked Joshua about a relationship problem, and she's had a partner, this guy, for many, many years. And there's an aspect of her, I shouldn't say what it is, that he does not like, and it's causing problems in their relationship. And she was basically saying, do I stay in this relationship and try and make it work, or am I just better off to go and find a new relationship, or will I just end up with the same old? And Joshua asked a number of questions, and eventually they asked this really incredible question. They said, this aspect of yours that your partner doesn't like, do you like that about yourself or not? And she said, no, I don't like that aspect of me at all. And Joshua said, well, your partner is merely reflecting that, how you feel about yourself. So if you were to change partners and you didn't change your attitude towards that aspect of yourself, nothing will change. Your new partner will reflect that as well. So in other words, it was like, well, you think it's your partner, but actually it's you disliking that part of yourself in the universe through one means or another is reflecting that back to you to give you the information, like you may or may not want to change that behavior, whatever it is, that aspect, but you do need to learn to love and embrace it, which kind of is an entree into where we're going to be going shortly when we do our call with Jessica and maybe a few others, where we talk about instant relationship transformation, where changing one's thinking about a key relationship caused instantaneous change in a key relationship. And some of us had that experience, and we're going to share those as well. So that's probably a good stopping point for today. You got some final words for us, Jerry?
Yeah, and I do think that even though when we talk about surrender, it doesn't mean crawling up on the couch, right, in a ball. It means listening and being open to inspiration to take inspired action, right? So in as a closing that loop, it doesn't mean you're not doing anything or not taking any action. It means you're taking a different type of action, right? You're taking that inspired action because you've accepted it. You're now open to receive different information. And when you spend those 15 or 20 minutes in the morning just quieting yourself, that information is going to come to you, and that's the information you need to take action on. Right. So that's sort of how you close it all up, right? With surrender. We think we're just going to put a white flag and go to jail. Like that's not, that's not what we're talking about. Right.
So I'm just scribbling down some things I want to say, because there's 4 things that occurred to me there. That surrender is not giving up, like you said, going to jail. It's not being a victim. It's like, I just give up, and it's like letting it all come at you. It's also not surrendering to an imagined external higher power, which is kind of the Christian or the AA approach, which is why Krista has come up with a different approach to drinking than AA, which she also did. But it's actually dumping our misinformed human resistance to something and allowing, you might say, the God within or your inner self or whatever, to actually bring you some superior wisdom.
I love that misinformed. That's a great sort of statement, because it's a misinformed approach, right? You're lacking all this
any
information.
limiting belief, we know, is a belief that lacks information, right? And you often jump to an opinion, then you find out a whole lot of facts later and that opinion's wrong. So you could also say, well, I won't take a view on this because I know that in a week or a day or a month or whatever it is, more information will come along and then I'll have a different view. So let's not be too hasty to have opinions, because they change all the time. So then you realize opinions, most things that we think are facts are purely opinions, and misinformed ones at that, because otherwise we'd still believe what we believed when we were 3 or 4, right?
100%, 100%. And just to sort of close this out, there's Alan Watts has this great sort of the Chinese farmer analogy, right? When it comes to, expectation, surrender, and acceptance, where his horse runs off one day, and all the townspeople come over and say, "Oh my God, we're so sorry. It's terrible. Isn't it, God awful, you lost your horse?" And the farmer goes, "Maybe." Next day, 7 wild horses come to his farm, and he now has 7 horses. And all the townspeople come over and said, "Oh my God, it's amazing. You now have 7 horses. And, isn't that just great?" And the farmer goes, "Maybe." Then the next day, his son is riding the horse, trying to break the new wild horses, and falls off the horse and breaks his leg. And all townspeople come over and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. It's the worst thing that could have ever happened." And he goes, "Maybe." And the next day, the conscription officer comes to the village and is collecting all the boys, all the young men, to join the army and fight in the war. And they reject his son because he had a broken leg. And all the townspeople come over and said, "Oh, is it amazing that your son got passed over and he doesn't have to go to war?" And the Chinese farmer goes, "Maybe." So we look at each we try to control every little...
I have heard that story before. That is good. I've forgotten that. Just a great story. Yeah.
Right. And so we all look at those little individual events, but they're not. They're all linked to something so much more profound and so much more beautiful.
Which is kind of circling back to when I talked about your first romance, that it broke up and you were devastated. And it's like, yeah, it was painful at the time, like the leg break, but it saved me from going to war and getting killed. So anyway, so I learned a lot, and I now, and I don't want to be with that person I was that I first fell in love with, and I was whatever age as a teenager. And I'm so pleased that I did that, and we both moved on, and we're happily ever after somewhere different.
That's great. That's great.
That being this was great. One of my girlfriends from school when I was like teenager, I sort of ended up somehow, when she came back to New Zealand the one stage, she got in touch, And so her and her husband have become good friends of ours. They live in Australia, but Trace and I spent like 2.5 hours on Zoom with them the other day. And what was interesting is that she is actually really into the law of attraction. And I described channeling to her one day, and she said, "Oh yeah, I do that." And it's like, holy cow, how interesting.
That's
She's an
awesome.
artist. She's an artist as well, and
I love that.
she uses dreams and channeling for her artistic inspiration. So not that I'm saying, I wish I stayed with her, because we went out different paths. But that was interesting to me, that someone from back then who I thought, all right, we're going out different paths, we'll never see each other again. Many decades later on, you actually find that your paths converge somewhat again.
That's funny. That is. I like that.
Curious, isn't it? So that's a partly that eternally connected thing. That people in your life, you're eternally connected, which is why people you meet, especially in important relationships, later on, you have that sense of, I've always known that person, or I knew them before.
There's this this author, I forget his name, but he has his concept is that there are whatever 7.5 billion people on this planet. The people that are in your life, you've picked them. They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not by
accident.
It's a
very good perspective to have, isn't it? Because it makes you realize the importance of it.
And they're all playing a role. And you pick.
Yeah, that's right. And the importance and value and beauty of each relationship, like to really treasure it.
Right. It's interesting when you think about that. I mean, we could have picked any country to be born in. We could have done. I mean, we are where we are based upon, as Joshua says, these pre-birth intentions and these pre-birth agreements, right?
Yeah.
What are they actually, who they are with, and what, I mean, you find out that's part of the journey.
So I wonder what adventures you and I might have had together in, the last few thousand years.
There's no question that it's so interesting that we came together as maybe as more wisdom has, more experiences have come to us. We agreed at some point, said, okay, yeah, we don't need to do this together anymore. At this point, this is when we're going to hook up and do this, right? So that to me is the super interesting part. Like we both experienced so many similar things, right?
Yeah.
Differently. And we said, boom, you go out and do what you got to do. You got to get what you got to get done. And then we're going to figure this out. And then how do we spread this? How do we have this conversation?
Yeah.
How do we scale it?
Yeah. How do we disseminate this information? And it's interesting to me that you've really lashed onto TikTok, which is a very powerful medium right at the moment, and that you can see the power of that, like initially with your recipes, but now you're going to be talking more about what you believe and giving us some, thought bombs, like 30-second thought bombs on life-changing insights. Other than recipes, right? Which is also life-changing, but this stuff is completely life-changing.
Well, it's funny. My daughter's like, you gotta, and I'm like, I said to her, I said, whatever I'm inspired to do, I'm going to do. I'm there. If there's no consistency, I'm like, I'm not following anybody else's rules. Obviously, all the information you said, I think to me was super, super helpful as I'm going through it all and learning. But as I like, whatever I'm inspired to do, I'm going to do. Like that's
well, I think it's all about expressing yourself, and I'm just making this Cool Son personal brand. And the whole point of that is that the only thing you bring that's different is your unique self, right? And trying to do it in a formulaic way is never going to get anybody anywhere whatsoever. I started watching a webinar this morning on pricing for online courses and stuff. And besides the fact that she didn't tell me anything I didn't know, I could see that I know she's got this formula that I've learned in other places, and she was just following this boring webinar format, and it's like, can you give me some value? Like I could just about predict every next phase of her webinar. So if she actually had been more spontaneous and more herself, I wouldn't have left after 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's funny, right? And for me, my whole life I've been told, quiet, be quiet, be quiet, right? Executives, Ivy League educated people are quiet. And I've always been loud. So now I can go on these platforms and just go and be myself for 30 seconds without having anybody tell me to be quiet. I mean, whatever, I don't read. I mean, I haven't really read, nor do I really care what the comments are. I'm going to keep doing what I want to do. And like, it's funny. My daughter's like, did you read? I'm like, no, I haven't even read. No, I haven't read. Nor am I going to. I'm like, if anybody asks a question, I'm like, and I don't even have a problem with the haters. Like, okay, like if that's what they want, like, all right.
TikTok was made for you. TikTok was made for you to be able to express yourself. Like, make as much noise as you want, as much noise as you can. It's an amazing place. So anyway, I'll see you again shortly, and I'll also see you again on TikTok in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. Have a great day.
Yeah, same to you. Thanks, Jerry. Bye.